Reducing fossil fuel usage through biomass. Now, to understand the need for biomass, you need to understand the problem. The problem is climate change. Climate change is caused by the increase of greenhouse gas emissions, where fossil fuels are burned to produce energy for the entire world, and they emit greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane, which then warm the climate. They make sea levels rise, and they make biodiversity decreases a whole. Now, according to NASA, this is cause for the possible sixth mass extinction. So in order to avoid this, our problem is how do we reduce fossil fuel usage? Now, the answer comes from biomass energy, which, according to the Department of Energy, is defined as any form of previously living organic matter that is used to provide the same forms of energy that fossil fuels have and more. This can come from garbage, wood, crops, landfill gas, and other fuels. Now, some of the advantages that biomass energy has compared to fossil fuels are that they have high thermal efficiency. According to the Biomass Energy Research Center, it has a 70 to 80% efficiency rate for combined heat power, which is essentially thermal energy. This is one of biomass's two strengths, and it should be used accordingly. The Energy Information Administration and National Geographic both comment that the use of biomass's widespread sources, such as algae, can be rapidly harvested over and over, which makes it far more sustainable than non-renewable sources such as fossil fuels. Moreover, the EIA also states that since the CO2 from living matter has always been present in the environment, there are no increased CO2 emissions compared to fossil fuels. However, biomass is not without its weaknesses, and it is highly ineffective, according to the Biomass Energy Research Center, for electricity generation, having only a 25% efficiency rate compared to fossil fuels, 35 to 52%. Now, if any proponent of biomass energy is using an energy source that is twice as less efficient as fossil fuels, that would be a huge reduction in energy efficiency. Moreover, biomass is actually very environmentally harmful. See, Stanford, Selvig, and the EIA all perform studies on how the use of logging, which is the main source of biomass for wood, can open up more emissions for methane and ash. Methane contributes to the greenhouse effect, and ash will cause water pollution, air pollution, and loss of soil quality. Moreover, this opens the use of deforestation also opens an environment to invasive species, which could be as bad, if not worse, for a decline of biodiversity compared to fossil fuels. Moreover, according to the Department of Energy and Institute for Energy Research, biomass energy has an 8 to 15 cent kilowatt per hour generation rate compared to nuclear energy and fossil fuels 2 to 5 cent per kilowatt hour. This makes it 2 to 8 times more expensive, and that'll be a huge economic drain for any sponsor of biomass energy.
Now, how to use biomass efficiently or solutions. Biomass has a long way to go before it can be used as a sustainable form of energy in today's world, as it has an extremely detrimental effect on society and the largest form of current biomass, which is logging. Now, invasive species, however, is one of the least environmentally detrimental forms of biomass fuel, as well as it gets rid of an entirely another problem as a whole. Now, a study done in Stanford by Lily Zaire and David Bloomberg showed that two different Latvian invasive species, Correctulum sevosus and solidicide, respectively labeled H and S, were tested, and as you can see here, H had a 2 times lower ash content and a 4 times as high caloric value output, which essentially means that biomass can be used as a relatively efficient source, and this graph also calls in to bring more research into biomass so it can help improve in the future. The cons of this method, however, as it's more of a temporary placement of how to use it, rather than eradicating our original problem of climate change by getting rid of the fossil fuels. Now, our second solution, which is arguably the most important one, is to educate the public. A study done in Florida by biomass researchers Martha Monroe and Richard Plate showed that out of over 10,000 polled, 50% knew nothing about biomass, and only 3% considered themselves highly knowledgeable on the subject. This is extremely problematic message can cause misconceptions about biomass to rise and for false advocacy to occur. Once these polls were told that biomass was a alternate energy source, over 8/10 of the poll said they would advocate and believe that was a good thing with no other information. This is counterintuitive as biomass in reality, logging mainly, is a detrimental to the environment and not a very efficient source of fuel. In order to implicate more education into high schools, colleges, and as low as middle schools, the STEM program will have to be expanded. And right now this is being funded by the USDA, Department of Energy, and the NSA.
So our third solution is using biomass on a microscale level for thermal energy. Now, the pros to this are that it maximizes biomass's strengths, that being a 70 to 80% efficiency rate for thermal energy, as confirmed by the ERC. It's environmentally friendly and sustainable by using it on a microscale. It limits fossil fuel emissions and methane emissions, and it's also a clear short-term solution, giving the U.S. Or any proponent of biomass more time to figure out how to stop fossil fuel usage. However, it is only a short-term solution, not being permanent, and it's not fully clean. There's still being some CO2 emissions and methane, and this is also a message that more research should be conducted into the field of alternative energy. So it's not a silver bullet to the problem of climate change.
So out of these three solutions, our group chose to go in depth about using invasive species for biomass and biomass energy. So, as we all know, invasive species are extremely harmful to the environment. For example, the hemlock woolly alligator is an invasive insect from Asia that rapidly kills infested hemlock trees. In some parts of the eastern United States, it is estimated that up to 80% of hemlock trees have been killed by this invasive species. These forests represent important habitats for many animals, and with that crucial habitat gone, species that rely on them may face extinction. Similarly, the health of many forests is threatened by another example of invasive species, kudzu vines, introduced from Japan in the 19th century as an ornamental plant. This plant was widely distributed across the southern eastern United States as a means of erosion control and a food source for grazing animals. This vine soon became invasive. And can completely overgrow entire forests. In the process, it prevents sunlight from reaching the trees, effectively killing forests. Of course, by using invasive species as a food source in biomass, we can eliminate these harmful invasive species, which can overall improve the environment. So a study done by Conrad van Meerbeek, a researcher from the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences in KU Leuven in Belgium, Germany, analyzed 4 invasive species in Europe: Falopia japonica, Heraclea mantegazanium, Impatiens glandophilia, and Solaga gigantea. The study found that all 4 species had similar energy outputs to current biomass energy systems. Other research also shows that certain invasive grass species like switchgrass can also be used as a fuel source. The more we use invasive species, the less we have to rely on wood. The Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation says that when wood is harvested for biomass fuel, it damages the forest because it disrupts the soil, which can also release which damages the soil, of course, and its composition, and it releases more carbon dioxide. So again, the more invasive species we use, the less we have to rely on harmful fossil fuels and damaging the environment with wood harvesting. Also, we can also chip away at the invasive species population, which can theoretically eliminate the species. So there are some limitations to using invasive species as a fuel source. So as we all know, of course, invasive species are volatile and spread quickly. So when transporting invasive species from the harvesting centers to the bioenergy plants, there is a chance that the invasive species could spread around that area and hurt the environment. Also, when biomass is converted into different types of fuels and energy, the excess waste generated from the invasive species could have seeds of the invasive species which could possibly grow and infect that area with that exact invasive species. Another downside is that invasive plant species is that they do not guarantee the reduction of harmful gases that are released in the process of biomass. All biomass, including invasive species, releases harmful gases and emissions into the environment like ash. By using invasive species, we get the biomass from a good source, but the waste like carbon dioxide is still present. Because of these downsides, energy companies have not fully adopted the use of invasive species into their bioenergy plants. The risk of the species spreading is too high for most companies. More research on the use of invasive species needs to be done to make sure that they actually help the environment and not hurt it.
All in all, biomass is a very misconceptualized concept, as the leading biomass fuel right now is logging, and that's very detrimental to the environment. So until public education can get going, which would provide us a clear solution to today's climate change crisis, the invasive species will get biomass into it will get biomass going as a current source of energy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, boys. I'm going to start with Blake. Blake, could you tell me how your group decided to include Christian's perspective into the overall presentation?
So Christian really focused on his paper involved a lot of invasive species, which is our best solution by far, because he went in very much detail on how they took out two problems at once, and that was the majority of our slideshow.
Okay, thank you. Christian, how about reflecting on Blake and Sam's work? Which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
Well, I'd say that both impacted me, but Sam not as much because in my paper I also talked about the environmental problems of biomass. But for Blake's paper especially, he talked about public education, how most people don't actually know about biomass, and I was actually very surprised by that, because I originally thought it was a simple concept, but I didn't know that many people did not know about it, or didn't know in depth about it.
Thank you. And Sam, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
I think for the one of my arguments was performed by the International Journal of Sustainable Energy, and it showed the projected analysis of biomass for petajoules per year in China compared to its current day thing. And we found that biomass could only provide, in terms of 2030 and 2050, only about 15 to 20%, if less than 10% of China's current day annual energy consumption. And we chose to admit that because we already had more details on how biomass was ineffective when it came to electricity. So it was more just one over another.
And whose report was that in?
That was in mine.
Thank you very much.